If you're serious about passing your Security Plus exam on your first attempt, just as I did, then this is the video for you because I passed my CompTIA Security Plus on my first attempt. And in this video, we're going to go over 10 practice questions from Domain 4 of the exam objectives, security operations. So let's get started. Question 1. Which of the following involves assigning security clearances to resources in an organization to ensure security? Mandatory access control, discretionary access control, rule-based access control, or role-based access control? And the correct answer is MAC or mandatory access control because this is a security implementation that's used in organizations like the military, for example, when you need a very highly secured environment. So, what MAC does is that it assigns security labels or security clearances to resources, files, users in your organization, and so on. Because what this allows you to do is that it allows you to easily determine who should have access to files and who can have access to those files and resources. So for example, if I have a user who has the security clearance level of secret, but they're trying to access a file that has the security label of top secret, well, they can't have access to that file. But if you have a user that is assigned the security clearance or the security label of top secret, and they're trying to access a file that also has the security label of top secret, well, they have the rights and permissions to access, view, or modify that file. Discretionary access control is different than MAC because in DAC, it's the file owner, it's the one who created the file to begin with that decides who has access to this file, who can delete this file, who can read this file, who can view, modify, or make any changes to this file. Because in Mac, it's the operating system itself or it's the IT administrator that makes these changes and decides who has access to which files. In rule-based access control, this describes access control that is implemented using any kind of rules, any security devices that use rules to perform their function. So a DLP or a data loss prevention system that blocks the transference of sensitive data from leaving the organization uses rules. IPS or an intrusion prevention system uses rules to block real-time malware threats. Other systems that use rules are things like firewalls that block access based on port numbers or IP addresses, and it uses rules to accomplish this. And finally, role-based access control describes the association of your role or your job in the organization and what level of privileges you have. Because if you're just a regular user account, for example, and you're trying to access an administrator account, well, you don't have the roles to perform that function. Question 2. An organization is receiving multiple false positive IPS alerts on a mobile laptop. Which of the following should they most likely implement? Alert tuning, quarantine, log aggregation, or OSINT? And the correct answer is alert tuning because if we're receiving multiple false positives on an IPS, then the best thing we can do from the answers given is to tune down that alert. And what alert tuning is the concept of modifying the settings so that you just don't see that false positive anymore and you don't receive all those alerts and notifications. Quarantine is the concept of isolating or quarantining an infected device so that that malware doesn't spread to the other devices on the network. Log aggregation is associated with SIEM or Security Information and Event Manager. This is a system that correlates or aggregates logs from network devices all into a single system. And finally, OSINT describes open source intelligence. This is any kind of publicly available information. So for example, if you're researching an individual and you're using YouTube or using LinkedIn or Instagram or DuckDuckGo or Yandex, if you're doing any of these things, it's considered OSINT or open source intelligence because these are all classified as publicly available information. Question 3. A company is using mobile phones and fingerprint scanning to provide security. Which of the following would add additional authentication? One-time SMS code, smart cards used for login, hard authentication token, or iris scans? And the correct answer is a one-time SMS code because this describes something you know. Because we're using mobile phones, which is something you have, and fingerprint scanning, which is something you are. It's a biometric. And an iris scan or a retina scan are also considered biometrics, which are something you are. Smart cards and hard authentication tokens, these are both considered something you have, and we're already using the authentication factor of something you have right here with the mobile phones. So the only one that would provide something you know is a one-time SMS code. Question 4. Which of the following incident response steps would most likely involve root cause analysis? Eradication, containment, lessons learned, or recovery? And the correct answer is lessons learned, because this is the very last step in the incident response process, and this involves doing things like analyzing the root cause to see how the attacker managed to breach and gain access to that organization's systems and data. Other things that you perform in the lessons learned stage is that you analyze what you did good, what you did bad, and what can be improved next time that the incident response team is called in for help. Recovery is the process of using backups to revert back to your previous state before the infection occurred. Eradication comes right before recovery, and this involves eradicating or removing all the malware on that system using something like an antivirus software. And containment is the step that involves actually quarantining or isolating the affected systems so that they don't infect all the other network devices. But to analyze the root cause, that's always going to be found in lessons learned. So remember that for your exam because it's important. Question 5. An organization performed a non-credentialed scan of all network devices. Which of the following is most associated with CVSS? A catalog of existing vulnerabilities, vulnerability prioritization and patching, blocking real-time malware threats, or finding vulnerabilities and receiving payment? And the correct answer is B, vulnerability prioritization and patching, because CVSS is the common vulnerability scoring system, and this is absolutely associated with prioritizing and patching your vulnerabilities, because CVSS assigns a severity score to an existing vulnerability that has just been detected. So, for example, if you perform a network scan using, for example, the Nessus vulnerability scanner, and it detects a very severe vulnerability, such as the WannaCry ransomware vulnerability, that's going to have a severity rating of 10 out of 10. So, based on that, and the fact that that's the most severe vulnerability detected on the system, that's how you know which vulnerability to prioritize, the most critical ones, and which one to patch immediately. Same thing, you patch the most critical vulnerabilities first and foremost before the high or the lows or the medium level vulnerabilities. A catalog of existing vulnerabilities is associated with CVE, or common vulnerabilities and exposures, and this is just a catalog of existing vulnerabilities, and it provides you with a very brief description of what these vulnerabilities are. But for a severity rating and the prioritization, remediation, and patching of a vulnerability is always going to be CVSS, and this is also very important for your exam. Blocking real-time malware threats is associated with things like antivirus software or IPS, intrusion prevention systems. And finally, finding vulnerabilities and receiving payment is associated mostly with a bug bounty program, whereby you hack on a company's website that they gave you permission to perform. And if you find some vulnerabilities and you exploit those vulnerabilities, then the company will pay you a bounty, which is a sum of money. And this could also be associated to some degree with penetration testing, since it's kind of salary based, so you're getting paid kind of based on the vulnerabilities you find, but this is too specific of an answer for it to be penetration testing. Question 6. A Linux user is using the chmod command to modify file permissions for users and groups. Which of the following is being described? Mandatory access control, least privilege, ephemeral credentials, or discretionary access control? And the correct answer is discretionary access control, because this refers to the file owner, the person who created the file, who decides who should have access to the file, which other users on the system will have read access, write access, and so on. So a Linux user using the chmod command is absolutely associated with DAC. Mac uses security clearances to assign security labels to users and resources in the organization to determine who should have access to what resources. Least privilege is the concept of ensuring that your users don't have excessive rights or permissions beyond what they need to perform their job. So for least privilege, for example, you don't want a user account to have administrator level access because if that employee had any kind of malicious intentions, they could completely destroy your company on the inside by installing malware or installing ransomware or by exfiltrating data. Ephemeral credentials is considered something you know. This is something like a username and password that you can only use temporarily before those expire. So, say you have a 5 or 10 minute timer to use these credentials, this username and password, before it expires, and those credentials will then be revoked. But since we're the file owner and we're modifying file permissions, that's always going to be associated with DAC. Question 7. Which of the following digital forensics phases involves ensuring data is not tampered or modified with? Containment, e-discovery, acquisition, or preservation? And the correct answer is preservation because this is the second step in the digital forensics process. After you've acquired your data in the first phase, after you've collected this information, then you preserve it and ensure that that data is not tampered or modified with. And ensuring that data is not tampered or modified with is absolutely associated with things like hashing or integrity. So acquisition, like we said, is the very first step in the digital forensics investigation process, and it involves actually acquiring or collecting that data. E-discovery is a very brief term that describes this entire process of collecting, reviewing, analyzing, and finally reporting on that digital forensics information. And containment isn't even a digital forensics phase. This is a incident response phase that involves isolating your affected system so that they don't spread the malware to the entire network. But to preserve our data and to preserve the integrity of our data, we're going to use the preservation phase. Question 8. An attacker has exploited a web-based vulnerability using the following code. Script alert vulnerable script. Which of the following would have most likely prevented this vulnerability from occurring? Code signing, input validation, COPE implementation, or sandboxing? And the correct answer is input validation because right here we have a XSS or a cross-site scripting attack, and this is the concept of an attacker injecting a malicious JavaScript code into a web page. And input validation would block this just as it would block a SQL injection attack most of the times because input validation involves blocking certain characters from being entered into the keyboard. So if you wanted to block an apostrophe from being typed into a web page or a web forum, or you wanted to block the $sign or the @ or the hashtag or £sign, you could easily do this via input validation. Code signing is the concept of software manufacturers, when they deploy their applications, they assign their own digital signatures to the file so that when you run the file, you can be rest assured that that file is legitimate and it's actually coming from that official company. COPE implementation is the concept of corporate owned but personally enabled. This is the concept of an organization allowing you to bring in your own device but use it for work purposes as well. Sandboxing is the concept of isolating your applications in an environment so that if you want to, for example, launch a piece of malware to detonate it to see and analyze how the malware works, you can do this in a sandboxed environment that would provide the security, knowing that if you run it in a sandbox, it won't spread outside of the sandbox and onto other devices. Question 9. An organization is dealing with deleting hard drive data and destroying the drive itself. The company desires the following. All data must be permanently deleted and cannot be recovered using digital forensics tools. And physical proof of the destruction of the drives is required. Which of the following best suits their needs? Sanitization, certification, destruction, or BYOD? And the correct answer is certification because this provides the proof that the drives have been physically destroyed. And a lot of times in certification, you'll have a mix of sanitization and destruction using either a hammer, a drill, or some other way. Because data sanitization is the concept of ensuring that all data is permanently deleted and cannot be recovered, even if you were to use some specialized digital forensic software. Destruction, of course, the concept of physically destroying the drive, but this answer is incorrect because we wanted to have some physical proof that the destruction actually occurred. And if you just destroy it, that's not associated with proof. In certification, you get an actual certificate from that destruction company proving that your hard drives have indeed been destroyed. Finally, BYOD is the concept of bring your own device. It's when the organization allows users to bring in their own personal mobile devices into the organization to use. And question 10, a device is collecting logs from network devices into a centralized location. Which of the following is being described? OSINT, data loss prevention, aggregation, or tuning? And the correct answer is aggregation, because aggregation or log correlation is the concept of using something like a SIEM or a security information and event manager to collect all logs from network devices and put them into this single network device that collects and correlates all these logs, and it aggregates them. Data loss prevention, or DLP, is the concept of using a software program to prevent sensitive data that resides within the organization from being exfiltrated or transferred outside of that organization. OSINT is open source intelligence, and this involves analyzing publicly available information and public records like Facebook groups, Instagram, YouTube videos, any kind of search engine. This is all open source intelligence. And finally, tuning is associated with alert tuning. This is when you have things like false positives and you just don't want to see those alerts that are coming in every 2 minutes because you've already dealt with it for one reason or another, and you just want to shut off those alerts because they're distracting you. That's the concept of alert tuning. You're tuning it down so that it stops being nearly as annoying. So those were the 10 questions of Domain 4 of the exam objectives. And if you are genuinely serious about passing your CompTIA Security Plus exam on your first attempt, just as I did, then click the first link in the description and join my Telegram group. Because there, I post daily tips and tricks on exactly how to pass your CompTIA Security Plus exam. I tell you exactly what I did wrong the first time around and what I wish I had done that could have improved my score that much more and what would have made it a much more pleasant exam experience. So, if you're serious, click the link, join the group, and I'll see you there.